The Cathedral of Hollowmere had been carved from white stone older than any kingdom, and tonight every torch in its vaulted nave had been lit for the wedding of an Alpha King. Mavora stood in the upper gallery behind a curtain of woven ivy, her fingers white where they gripped the wooden railing. Below her, 2,000 wolves had gathered to witness a union that would reshape the borders of 3 realms. The scent of crushed lilies rose from the floor in waves so thick she could taste them. Pack lords in fur-trimmed robes filled the long pews. Ambassadors from the eastern coasts wore silver chains across their chests. Common wolves from the outer provinces crowded the side aisles, their faces turned toward the altar with reverence. She should not have come. For 3 nights she had told herself she would not look upon him again. For 3 nights she had sat at the small window of the rooms above the apothecary where she worked, watching snow fall on the slate rooftops, telling herself she was strong enough to remain there. But when the bells of Hollowmere began to ring at dusk, her body had risen as though it belonged to someone else. Her cloak had fastened itself around her shoulders. Her feet had carried her down the servants' staircase and across the city in the dark. And now here she stood, hidden behind ivy, watching the man she loved wait for another woman at the altar. Cason Vrain had been hers for 7 months. She had met him in the herb garden at the edge of the royal grounds, where she gathered moonflower petals for the apothecary's mistress. He had stepped out from between the apple trees one evening, his crown of office tucked beneath his arm as though it embarrassed him, and asked her name as though kings asked such questions every day. He had returned the next night, and the night after. He had pressed his lips to her wrist in a stone alcove behind the kitchens. He had whispered her name like it was a secret worth dying for. He had brought her a single white candle on the longest night of winter, and he had told her, with his forehead pressed against hers, that no woman in any council chamber would ever take her place. "Bear with me," he had said. "The treaties demand a public match. Once the lords are satisfied, I will tell the world what you are to me. I swear this on my wolf and my crown." She had believed every word. Her hand drifted to the hollow beneath her collarbone, where a small mark sat hidden beneath the cloth of her dress. He had given it to her on a night of low moon, his teeth gentle against her skin, his amber eyes fixed on hers as though he was afraid she might dissolve. The mark had pulsed with warmth ever since, a quiet second heartbeat she had carried into every room. Tonight, that warmth was burning. The mark felt as though a hot coin had been pressed against her flesh. She gritted her teeth against it, leaning harder into the railing. Below, the high priestess raised both arms, and the cathedral fell into a hush so complete that Mavora could hear her own breath shaking in her throat. Her other hand pressed flat against the soft swell low in her belly, where a different secret was growing. 6 weeks. She had been certain for 6 weeks. She had practiced the words for telling him in the small mirror above her wash basin, watching her own mouth shape the sentence over and over until it sounded like something a woman might actually say to a king. "I am carrying your child." She had been waiting for the right night. She had been waiting for him to come to her window the way he always did, with snow in his hair and a smile that belonged to no one else. Instead, the bells had rung. The bride entered. Sarah Volkmere walked down the long aisle in a gown of pale silver, her fair hair coiled high, a circlet of star flowers resting across her brow. Her family controlled the salt mines of the western coast, 4,000 sworn warriors, and a vote on the High Council that the kingdom could not afford to lose. The crowd murmured its approval as she passed. The Volkmeres had positioned their daughter for this day since she was a child. Mavora forced herself to look at Cason. He stood at the altar in a long black coat embroidered with silver wolves, his dark hair swept back from his forehead, his hands folded behind his back. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, the way a winter sky is beautiful when it is full of knives. But something was wrong. The recognition came slowly, the way cold water seeps into a boot. He was not standing the way Cason stood. His shoulders were too rigid. His chin was too high. His amber eyes, those eyes that had wept against her shoulder more than once in the dark, were fixed on the bride with the flat, polished glaze of glass. He did not blink at the right moments. He did not breathe at the right moments. When Sarah reached him and offered her hand, his fingers closed around hers a half-second too late, as though some other person were working the strings of his body from a distance. Cason Vrain, Alpha King of Marrowfell, sworn of the old blood, the high priestess intoned. Do you take this woman as queen, in the sight of the moon and the bones of your fathers? The silence stretched. Mavora did not breathe. The mark beneath her collarbone burned so fiercely she thought the cloth of her dress would scorch. Look up, she begged silently. Look up at the gallery. Find me. Stop this. Cason's mouth opened. I take her, he said, and his voice was a stranger's voice. Before the moon and the bones. The cathedral erupted. Cheers rolled up the stone walls. Wolves howled in the aisles. Pack lords clapped one another on the back. Somewhere a horn began to sound, deep and triumphant, the call that had not been heard in Marrowfell for 100 years, the call that announced the kingdom had a queen. Mavora made a sound she did not recognize. The mark beneath her collarbone tore. There was no other word for it. It felt as though a hand had reached into her chest and ripped a piece of her free. She doubled over against the railing, both arms wrapping around her stomach, and a sob broke from her mouth before she could stop it. No one heard. The cathedral was a sea of celebration. No one was looking up. Through the burning behind her eyes, she watched Cason lift Sarah's hand to his lips, watched him perform the slow ritual kiss of acceptance, watched him turn with his new bride toward the cheering crowd, his face still arranged in that hollow stranger's mask. He did not look up. He did not look for her. He did not seem to know that she existed in the world. She turned and ran. The gallery stair was narrow and unlit. She went down it with one hand pressed against the wall and the other locked across her belly, her cloak snagging on iron sconces, her breath coming in ragged, tearing gulps. By the time she reached the side passage at ground level, she was running blind, tears blurring the world into shapes of torchlight and shadow. She did not slow down. She did not stop until she reached the small set of rooms above the apothecary on Velen Street and slammed the door behind her. Then she crumpled. She fell to her knees beside the cold hearth and pressed her forehead to the floor and let the sound out of her at last, a low animal keening that no one in the city heard above the wedding bells. Somewhere in Hollowmere, a feast was beginning. Somewhere wolves were drinking to the new queen. Somewhere Cason Vrain, the man who had whispered her name into her hair, was raising a goblet to a stranger. She would not stay. She would not stay one more night in this kingdom where her child would be a shame and her mark would be a wound. She rose, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the strings of her travel pack. She took her grandmother's iron ring. She took the small leather book of remedies she had copied out by candlelight. She took the little pouch of coins she had been saving for a winter cloak. At the window she pressed 2 fingers to her lips and then to the cold glass. Be well, my love, she whispered to the dark. Be happy with the queen you chose. Then she pulled her hood low and slipped down the back stairs into an alley, and from the alley into the snow, and from the snow into the wide black night beyond the city walls. She did not see the figure standing on the cathedral's high tower. She did not see the way his hands had begun to shake at the altar, 10 minutes too late, and his amber eyes blinking as though he had only just woken. And she did not hear the howl that tore out of him when he reached the empty gallery and found nothing but a single bent ivy leaf where she had stood. A sound so raw that for one impossible moment every wolf in Marrowfell stopped drinking and lifted their heads, listening to a grief they could not name. By the time Cason Vrain reached the rooms above the apothecary, Mavora was already gone. 4 months later, the village of Brindlewatch had grown used to the quiet woman who lived above the bakery. She had arrived on the last card of autumn, a young widow, she said, her cheeks hollow from grief, and a gentle swell already beginning to round her cloak. The baker had taken pity on her. The miller's wife had taken pity on her. The old herb woman at the end of the lane had taken one look at her hands and offered her work. Within a week, she was grinding willow bark and binding poultices, and brewing teas for the village's coughs and chills, and within a month, the people of Brindlewatch had stopped asking questions about where she had come from. She called herself Yenna now. The name had come to her on the road, on a night when the cold had nearly killed her, and she had whispered it to herself over and over until it began to feel like something she could wear. Mavora was gone. Mavora had loved a king and lost. Yenna was a widow with a child to bring into the world, and Yenna did not look at the eastern road, and Yenna did not flinch when the wind blew from the direction of Hollowmere. That was what she told herself. Spring had begun to soften the edges of the snow when the dreams started getting worse. She would wake in the small hours with her hand pressed to the mark beneath her collarbone, gasping, and the taste of his name on her tongue. The mark had not faded. By every law of wolf-kind, it should have closed and silvered and gone smooth within a fortnight of his marriage, but instead it had darkened. It pulsed at strange hours. Sometimes, in the deepest part of night, she would feel something pushing against the edges of her mind from very far away, something searching, something desperate, and she would press the heels of her hands against her eyes until the sensation passed. False hope, she told herself, was a poison stronger than any she knew how to brew. The babe was kicking now. Strong, steady kicks that came from one side and then the other, as though more than one small body were turning beneath her ribs. The herb woman, whose name was Mother Druve, and whose eyes saw too much, had laid her palm on Mavora's belly one morning and gone very still. 2 heartbeats, she had said quietly. Maybe 3. Mavora had not asked her what she meant. It was on a gray afternoon in early spring, when the last of the icicles were dripping from the eaves, that Calden the cooper's boy came pounding up the bakery stairs with news from the road. "Mistress Yenna," he gasped, 10 years old and pink with running. "Mistress Yenna, there are riders from the south, real riders, with the silver wolves on their cloaks. They have stopped at the inn." Mavora's mortar slipped from her fingers. It struck the table, rolled, and fell to the floor with a small clear sound that seemed to fill the room. "The king's riders?" she said, and her voice was almost steady. Calden nodded so hard his hair fell into his eyes. "They are asking everyone questions. They want to know about a woman. A healer, they say, with dark hair and a mark on her chest." His eyes were huge. "Mother says the king has gone mad. Mother says he has been searching for this woman for months, and that he tore down half the eastern villages last winter looking for her. Mother says he offered 10,000 gold pieces for word of her, and twice that for the woman herself, alive." The room tilted. Mavora gripped the table with both hands. The babe kicked once, hard, as though it had heard its father's name. The mark beneath her collarbone flared with sudden heat, and for a moment she could not breathe through it. "Thank you, Calden," she heard herself say. "Tell your mother I will come down in a moment." The boy nodded and bolted back down the stairs. She sat down very slowly on the wooden stool beside the window. He was searching for her. He had been searching for her since the night she had run. Why? She had imagined every possible reason for his behavior at the altar 1,000 times over the long winter, and not one of them had ended with the king of Marrowfell sending riders to the far provinces with her description on their lips. A man who had cast her aside did not hunt his discarded lover through 3 kingdoms. A man who had married willingly did not offer 20,000 gold pieces for a healer in a borrowed name. Unless, she thought, and her hand drifted to the mark, unless the hollow stranger she had seen at the altar had not been him at all. A wolf moved at the tree line. She saw it from the window, where she had not even realized she was looking. a great gray shape stepping from between the pines, its head lifted, its yellow eyes turned directly toward the bakery roof. As she watched, a second emerged at its shoulder. Then a third. 4, 5 wolves, large as ponies, and not one of them moved like an animal. They moved like soldiers. They had found her. The mark beneath her collarbone exploded with heat. She doubled over, gasping, and the sensation that came with it was not pain, but presence. Something massive was pressing against the inside of her chest, something that had not been able to reach her this clearly in 4 months. Her babes kicked wildly, both sides at once. He was close. Not the wolves. Him. A heavy boot struck the wooden stair below. Then a knock, polite and careful. The kind of knock a man uses when he does not wish to frighten a woman behind a door. Mistress Yenna. The voice was a man's, low and unhurried. I bear no weapon in my hand. I would be grateful if you would open. She did not move. Mistress, please. The voice was gentler than she had expected. I know who you are. I have come a very long way and I am very tired. I would prefer not to break this door. She rose. Her legs barely held her. She crossed the small room and lifted the iron poker from beside the cold hearth, and only then did she draw the bolt and step back. The door swung inward. A man stood on the landing alone. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 50, his beard streaked with gray and his coat travel-stained. 2 warriors waited a respectful distance behind him on the stairs, their hoods drawn back, and their faces watchful but unarmed. The older man's eyes were a clear, pale gold, and when they settled on her belly, something in his face cracked open with what looked unmistakably like relief. My lady, he said. The title struck her like a slap. My name is Yenna, she said. The poker did not waver. I am a widow. You have made an error. Your name is Mavora of No House, the man said quietly. You served 2 seasons at the apothecary of Kadarin Pell in the lower city of Hollowmere. You bear the king's mark beneath your left collarbone, given to you on the night of the half-moon at the end of summer. You are with child by Cason Vrain, Alpha King of Marrowfell, and that child, or those children, are heirs to the wolf throne. He took off his glove and laid his hand flat against his chest. I am Oren Halcaster, first beta of the King's Pack. I have been searching for you since the morning after the wedding. The poker dropped from her hand. It struck the floor with a clatter she barely heard. Forgive me. Halcaster stepped across her threshold without waiting for permission, but he stopped at a careful distance and did not advance. I would not come to you like this if there were time for kinder methods. The king did not choose her Mavora. He did not choose Sarah Volkmir. He did not know what he was doing on the night of the wedding. The room narrowed to a tunnel. What? She whispered. On the morning of the ceremony, his cup was tampered with. We believe the agent was a tincture of fell smoke, distilled with 3 other compounds we have not yet been able to name, pressed into the wax of the ceremonial chalice so that it leached into the wine over a period of hours. By the time he stood at the altar, his wolf had been silenced, and his bond to you had been smothered. He moved as a man moves in deep sleep. Halcaster's jaw tightened. He woke 3 days later in his own bed, with no memory of the wedding at all. The first word he spoke when he came back to himself was your name. The first thing he did was run to the rooms above the apothecary, and when he found them empty, he howled until his voice gave out. Mavora sat down. She did not remember choosing to. The stool was suddenly under her and she was on it, and the room was very far away, and Halcaster was kneeling now in front of her. Who? She said. Her voice was a thread. Who did this? We are nearly certain it was House Volkmir. His mouth was a hard line. Sarah's family has hungered for the throne since the old wars, with the king bound to their daughter by witnessed oath in the Cathedral of Hollowmere, and with you out of the picture, they would have what they have always wanted. We have no proof yet that a court would accept. We have only patterns, and 3 servants who have since disappeared. And this. He drew a folded square of parchment from inside his coat. It was intercepted at our southern gate 3 weeks ago. It bears the Folkmere seal. She took the parchment with numb fingers. The seal had been broken. The hand inside was small and tight and unfamiliar. The false mate is in the bakery village south of the marsh. The child must not be allowed to draw breath. See it done before the next full moon. Long live the queen. The world went gray at the edges. Assassins, she breathed. We do not know how many. 2 we have already accounted for. The others are somewhere ahead of us, or behind, or already in the village. Halcaster looked up, and for the first time she saw the deep exhaustion under his calm. My lady, the king is on his way here. He is 2 days' ride behind me, and he will find this place with or without my help, because the bond is leading him. Every time your mark wakes, he feels it. It is the only thing that has kept him from going feral entirely. The mark beneath her collarbone pulsed in answer, as if to confirm him. A wolf howled somewhere outside the window. Halcaster's head snapped up. The howl was not from one of his men. It was from the trees beyond the mill race, and there was a note in it that made the hair rise on the back of Maevora's neck. He was on his feet in an instant. They are here, he said, and pulled a long knife from his belt. Get behind me. Stay behind me until I tell you otherwise. She turned her head toward the window. In the gray light of late afternoon, 6 dark wolves were padding across the snow-streaked yard behind the bakery. They moved together like one creature with 12 legs, and at their head, walking upright on 2 legs in a long black coat, came a figure whose face was hidden behind a polished mask carved in the shape of a crow. The Volkmere hunters had reached Brindlewatch. The window shattered before Halcaster could finish drawing breath. A bolt of black iron buried itself in the timber of the wall, a hand's breadth from Maevora's shoulder, and the smell that rose from its tip was the rotten green smell of a poison meant for hearts. Halcaster had her by the elbow before she could scream. He flung her bodily across the room toward the inner wall and put his own shoulder between her and the window, and at the same instant she heard the 2 warriors on the stairs roar in a way that no human throat could have produced. Cloth tore, bones cracked into a new arrangement. The bakery shook as 2 great wolves burst through the front door in a single bound and met the dark wolves in the snow. The cellar, Halcaster said, low and hard. Now. The cellar has no exit. It has a stone roof. A bolt cannot reach you through a stone roof. Move, Maevora. A second arrow slammed through the wall and embedded itself in the lid of the kneading trough. Flour spilled across the boards in a slow white sigh. Outside, a wolf yelped, a sound of tearing pain, and was suddenly silent. They are not here for me alive, Maevora said. The realization was strangely calm. They have orders to kill me on sight. Yes. Halcaster pressed the long knife into her hand. The grip was warm from his palm. Silver-edged. It will draw blood from a shifted wolf. Do not hesitate. His eyes flickered yellow as his wolf rose under his skin. Stay low. Stay alive. Do not come out for any voice but mine or his. He went out the window without bothering with the door. She heard the wet sound of his transformation hit the snow, followed by a snarl that shook the icicles loose from the eaves. Then there was only chaos. The sound of bodies meeting, the thud of paws, the shriek of a wolf being driven into a wooden post. A single human cry, sharp and quickly cut off. She crouched against the inner wall with the silver-edged knife in her shaking hand and listened. She listened to her babes kicking against her ribs. She listened to her own breath sawing in and out. She listened to the mark beneath her collarbone, which had begun to burn so steadily and so fiercely that she could feel each separate beat of it. And underneath the burn, she could feel something else now, something that was not herself. A blazing column of fury so vast that it made her eyes water. A grief so old it felt like geology. A love that was not gentle, that was not patient, that was not kind, that wanted only to find her and bury its face in her throat and never lose her again. He was coming, but not fast enough. Through the broken window, she saw Halcaster's gray wolf fly sideways through the air and crack against the trunk of a dead apple tree. He fell in the snow and did not rise quickly enough. 3 dark wolves circled him with the patient coordination of trained killers. One of his warriors was already down, motionless. The other was nowhere to be seen. He was going to die for her. He was going to die in the snow behind a bakery while she crouched against a wall. Something inside Mavora went very still. She had spent her life keeping a small thing hidden. She had been 5 years old when her mother had taken her face in both hands and told her, with tears in her eyes, that the warmth in her palms must never be shown to another living soul. She had been 7 when she had laid her hands on her dying grandmother and watched the old woman's breath even out, and her mother had not spoken to her for 3 days afterward out of sheer terror. She had been a girl in a village without lords, and girls in villages without lords did not have light in their hands. Girls in villages without lords were drowned for it. She had grown into a woman who folded the warmth away every morning the way other women folded their hair into a braid. She had used it only twice in 7 years, both times in secret, both times for children who would not have lived through the night. Tonight, she thought, she was going to die anyway. She set the silver knife down on the floorboards. She pressed her palms together. The warmth came faster than she remembered. It rose from somewhere behind her heart and ran down her arms and pooled in her cupped hands like a small contained sun. And when she opened her fingers, a soft gold light spilled out and lit the broken room from the inside. The smell of crushed flowers filled the air, although there were no flowers anywhere. She stepped to the shattered window and climbed through it into the snow. The fight stopped. It was the most extraordinary thing. 8 wolves in the yard, 4 of them dark and 4 of them not, all of them locked in some configuration of teeth and claw, and at the sight of her every single muzzle turned in her direction and went still. The dark wolves blinked. One of them whined low in its throat, an involuntary sound of confusion. The crow-masked figure standing beneath the mill wheel stiffened. She walked across the bloody snow to where Halcaster lay. Her bare feet left small prints of light behind her. "You will not have him," she said, and she did not recognize her own voice. There were other voices inside it, low and very old. "You will not have any of mine." She knelt beside the gray wolf and laid both glowing palms flat against his ribs. He shuddered once, and then went limp. The light poured into him. She felt the broken bones in his chest knit, the torn muscle close, and the great wound on his shoulder seal itself into pale new skin under her hands. The healing went out of her and into him, and something else went with it. Something more costly, and something she had not known she was spending. By the time he opened his eyes, she was breathing hard. A dark wolf lunged for her throat. The light flared without her thinking about it. The wolf yelped as though it had been struck across the face by a bar of hot iron. It twisted in midair, hit the snow on its side, and was up and running for the trees inside 2 heartbeats. 2 of its packmates broke and followed. Her hands shook. She had not meant to give that much. The crow-masked figure had not moved. It only stood there beneath the mill wheel, head tilted slightly, watching her with the unreadable patience of a stage performer waiting for a cue. Then, slowly, it raised its crossbow. "Oh," said a woman's voice behind the polished beak of the mask. It was a young voice, almost amused. "The healer is a sun-touched. The Folkmeers will pay extra for that." The bolt was already loaded. Mivora's light flickered. She felt the gold in her palms gutter like a candle in a draught. She had given too much to Halcaster. There was nothing left in her hands for herself, and the masked woman had seen it, and the bolt was rising, and the babes inside her were thrashing, and Halcaster was still struggling to push himself upright in the snow at her knees. The crossbow loosed. A shadow crossed the moon. She did not see what came out of the trees. Her eyes registered only that the world tilted, that something moved between her and the bolt. With a speed her mind could not measure, that the air filled with a noise like a mountain being torn in half. The trees on the far side of the yard came down all at once, a whole row of them, snapped at the trunks. The mill wheel cracked from rim to axle. The snow lifted in a great shocked wave and hung in the air for a heartbeat. The crow-masked woman was lifted off the ground. The bolt that had been meant for Maevora's heart was hanging in midair, caught between two enormous black teeth. The teeth belonged to the largest wolf she had ever seen. It was bigger than a warhorse. Its fur was the deep black of a moonless lake. Its eyes were not yellow, not amber, but the molten gold of a forge at full burn. And they were so bright that the snow around its paws had started to melt into wet rings. It crushed the bolt between its teeth and let the splinters fall. The masked woman opened her mouth to say something. The wolf killed her before she got the second sound out. It was very fast and very quiet. The body fell into the snow and the wolf turned. Slowly, deliberately, every motion controlled, until its enormous burning eyes found Maevora. She could not move. The wolf came toward her one careful step at a time. Blood steamed on its muzzle. Its great chest rose and fell with breaths so deep she could hear them across the yard. When it reached her, it lowered its head and pressed the broad flat of its nose, very gently, against the curve of her belly. Inside her, two small bodies pressed back. The wolf made a sound she would never forget. It was not a growl. It was not a whimper. It was the noise a man makes when he has been holding his breath for 4 months and has just been allowed at last to let it out. "Kaysen," she whispered. The shift took less than a heartbeat. One moment a black wolf the size of a horse stood in the snow. The next, a man knelt at her feet in a ruined coat, his dark hair damp with sweat, his hands raised toward her belly and trembling so hard he could not seem to make them land. He looked up at her, and the Alpha King of Marrowfell, who was supposed to be far away in his cathedral with a queen at his side, was weeping. Maevora had pictured this moment 1,000 times along 1,000 cold roads. She had pictured him riding into Brindlewatch at the head of his guard, his face hard, and his orders short. She had pictured a glance that did not know her. She had pictured chains. She had pictured the small humiliation of being marched back to Hollowmere on a wagon, her belly visible to every passerby, the disgraced lover of a king who had moved on to better arrangements. She had not pictured him on his knees in the snow, weeping. The Alpha King of Marrowfell knelt in the ruined yard of a bakery, and the most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms could not seem to make his hands move the last inch through the cold air to touch her. He held them out flat with the palms upward, a small pleading gesture from a man who had never pleaded for anything in his life. "Maevora," he said. His voice was wrecked. "May I?" The 2 words undid her. She took his right hand in both of her own and laid it against the slope of her belly. The babes shifted under her palm at the touch. They had not been still all day, but at the press of his hand they came alive in a way she had not felt before, both of them rolling toward him as though they had spent 4 months listening for him through her skin and had finally heard the voice that belonged to them. His face crumpled. "2," he whispered. "Maevora, there are 2. She wanted to tell him. She had practiced telling him in another life. She had stood in front of a small mirror and shaped sentences for a man who had never come to the window. The sentences died in her throat now. "Yes," she managed. He let his forehead come down very slowly until it rested against the swell of her belly, and his shoulders shook, and his hand lay flat against the fabric of her dress as though he was afraid that if he lifted it, the children inside might forget him again. She looked down at the dark crown of his hair, and the 4 months of grief she had been carrying began to crack open inside her chest, and with them, terribly, the 4 months of fury. "Get up," she said. He raised his head. "Get up." She stepped back from his hand. The cold rushed into the place where his palm had been. "Get up and look at me." He rose. Snow slid from his coat. His amber eyes, the eyes that had been hollow and glass on the night of the wedding, were bright now in a way that was almost unbearable. And when she met them with her own, she had to clench her teeth to keep her voice steady. "Were you drunk?" she said. He flinched. "What?" "At the altar. Were you drunk? Were you bored? Were you tired of me? Tell me what it was, Kaysen, because I have spent 4 months walking from one end of this kingdom to the other, trying to think of a reason a man might whisper to a woman in the dark for 7 months and then look through her like glass in front of 2,000 people. I want to know which one it was." "I was poisoned." He said it quietly. "Hellcaster told me." "Then you know." "I know what he said." Her voice rose and she did not bother to lower it again. There were dead wolves in the snow and a mill wheel split in two, and her cottage had a hole in the wall, and she did not care who heard. "I do not yet know whether I believe it. Do you understand what you did to me? Do you understand what it was to stand behind a curtain of ivy and watch the only man I have ever loved take another woman's hand and not even bother to look up? Do you have any conception of the size of it?" "Yes." His voice cracked on the word. "Yes, I have a conception of the size of it, because I have been carrying my half of it through every hour of every day since I woke. I woke in a bed I did not remember entering. There was a woman in my room who I would not have invited to clean my boots. There was a ring on my finger I had not put there. I went to your apothecary and you were gone, Mavora. The window was open. The candle had burned down to the wick. Your grandmother's ring was missing from the dish where you kept it. I have lived in the size of it since the morning after the wedding, and I would have lived in it for the rest of my life if I had not found you. Do not tell me about the size of it. You married her. My body married her. I was not in it. That is a fine line for a king to walk. It is not a line at all. It is an annulment under the laws of every pact we have." His hands closed into fists at his sides. "It was annulled the moment I came back into myself. It will be voided in council before any priest of any house. The Folkmeers took the use of my mouth from me for 1 hour, and they will pay for that hour with everything they have. But I did not choose her. I have never chosen anyone but you. From the night I stepped out of those apple trees in the herb garden, I have never chosen anyone but you, and the only reason I am still alive at all is that this—" He tapped his own chest, low, where her mark on him answered her mark on her, "would not let me stop looking." She put her hand over her mouth. She did not want to weep in front of him. She had wept enough in his name. She had wept on the road to Brindlewatch, and she had wept in the rooms above the bakery, and she had wept into the lap of an old herb woman who had asked her no questions, and she had decided somewhere in the last month that she was finished crying for Kaysen Vrain. But the tears came anyway. They were quieter now. They ran down her cheeks without sound, and she let them. "I waited for you," she said, "that night, after the wedding. I waited even when I knew. I sat at my window for 2 hours after the bell stopped, just in case. I was on the floor of the cathedral vestry. I could not stand up. They had to carry me out. I had been going to tell you about the babe." His face broke. There was no other word for it. The Alpha King of Marrowfell stood in front of her, with his face broken open, and he did not try to hide it. "Mavora." His voice was a whisper. "Forgive me. I do not have any right to ask you to. But I will spend every day from now until I die asking you to anyway." She did not answer at once. She turned her head and looked at the ruined yard. Halcaster had risen, slowly, and was standing a respectful distance away, with his arms folded across his chest, his eyes politely on the broken mill wheel. Two of the village men had come to the edge of the lane and were staring open-mouthed at the small mountain of dead wolves and the shattered tree line. The babes inside her kicked, both at once. She thought about the long winter. She thought about the night she had nearly frozen on the road north of Hollowmere, when she had crawled under the lee of a fallen oak and pressed both hands to her belly and told her unborn children in a thin voice that their father had not wanted them. She thought about how furious she had been with herself for being unable to stop loving him, how she had cursed her own heart for its loyalty to a man she believed had thrown her away. She thought, with a small stunned ache, that her heart had been right all along. "I love you," she said. It came out quiet. It had nothing of forgiveness in it yet. It was only the thing that was true, said aloud at last, and she had not said it to him in 7 months of secret nights, and she had not been able to say it through 4 months of exile, and now she said it standing in a yard full of dead enemies with snow in her hair. He closed his eyes. She watched the king of a country take a breath like a man who had just been allowed to come up from underwater. "Mavora," he said, "I love you. I have loved you since the second night in the herb garden. I have loved you the whole of the worst year of my life. I will love you in any country, in any shape, on any throne or off it, for as long as I am permitted to draw breath." She walked the 2 steps between them. She put her arms around his neck, and she pressed her wet face into the cold leather of his collar, and his arms came around her so carefully, with his hand spread wide and protective over the curve of her belly, that she understood at last that he was afraid she might still vanish. "I am here," she whispered into his throat. "I am here." He did not answer with words. He only held her, and after a long moment she felt his face come down to rest in her hair, and the mark beneath her collarbone went, for the first time in 4 months, perfectly quiet. Halcaster cleared his throat. "My king," he said, with the dry calm of a man delivering bad news to a man holding a miracle. "We cannot stay here. The Folkmeres will know within a day that their hunters did not return. The next wave will not be 6, it will be 60. Kaysen lifted his head. The amber in his eyes hardened into something colder. "Then we ride for Hollowmere tonight," he said. "All of us. Mavora rides with me. The Folkmeres have placed themselves outside the protection of my house, and before this season ends, I will see every standard of theirs taken down from every wall." He looked down at her. "If you will come." She thought about saying that she could not. She thought about the babes and the road and the soldiers waiting at the other end of it. Then she thought about Mother Druve and the baker and Calden the cooper's boy, who had been kind to her when no one else in the world had been. She thought about all the women in all the kitchens in Hollowmere who had once smiled at her in the corridors of the apothecary, and about the apothecary's mistress herself, who had probably already been questioned. She thought about the kind of king Kaysen would be if she let him ride to that war alone with her name on his lips. "I am coming," she said. "We finish this together." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Together," he said. Behind him, on the far hill, a long wolf cry rose into the dusk. It was not from any of his pack. It was answered, after a moment, by another, and then by another. The hills around Brindlewatch were full of voices, and they were closing in, and she did not yet know whose they were. They rode out of Brindlewatch under a moon the color of old bone. Kaysen lifted her onto his black warhorse with hands that shook in a way she did not call attention to. He climbed up behind her and wrapped his cloak around them both, and his arms settled across the swell of her belly with the careful permanence of a vow. The horse moved beneath them as though it understood what it was carrying. Halcaster rode at the king's right hand. 20 wolves loped beside the road in fur, their breath rising in pale plumes, their eyes catching torchlight from the watch posts. Behind them, more wolves. Behind those, more. By the time the column reached the high road, the column was no longer a column. It was a tide. She had thought she would protest. She had thought she would tell him that her back ached, that she could not ride at this pace, that the babes needed quiet. She did not say any of these things. She leaned back against his chest and felt his heartbeat at the base of her skull and let her body settle into the warmth of him, and the babes settled too, into the deepest stillness she had felt from them in months. "My wolf needs you near," he said into her hair very low. "Forgive me. I cannot put you down." "Then do not." He told her things as they rode. He told her about waking in his own bed 3 days after the wedding, with his mouth full of the taste of wax and his head splitting and a stranger asleep in the chair beside him. He told her about the shape of the chamber when he came back into himself, about the way the morning light had fallen through the leaded windows onto a velvet wedding cloak that had been laid across his footboard, about how the very sight of it had made him retch into a copper basin until there was nothing left in him to bring up. He told her about going to the apothecary on Vellon Street. He told her about the cold candle. He told her about the empty dish where her grandmother's ring had been. He told her about the months, the riders sent to every village, the maps unrolled until the parchment cracked, the counselors who had begged him to eat, the night he had come within a breath of going feral, when he had run through the South Wood for 2 days and 3 nights, and been brought back to himself only by the sudden flare of warmth from her mark, somewhere out there in the dark, telling him she was still alive. "That was the night the babes first kicked," she said. She had not meant to say it. The words rose out of her before she could stop them. He went very still behind her. "The end of the 2nd month," she said. "I felt them for the first time. And the mark woke me from a dream of running off a cliff." She turned her head and looked up at him. "I dreamed of you," she said. His arms tightened. "Every night," she went on, "from the first week on the road, you would come into my room and stand at the foot of the bed. You did not always speak. Sometimes you only looked at me. Sometimes you said my name. Sometimes you said, 'I will find you, Mevora. Do not leave the world before I find you.' And I would wake up with my hands on the mark and my mouth full of an answer I did not get to give." He made a small wounded sound. "I thought I was going mad," he said. "I thought my wolf was inventing you. I would wake up with the smell of you in my coat and I would tell myself it was grief. Halcaster found me one morning standing in the corridor outside my chambers in nothing but my shirt, asking the guards which way you had gone. They were not dreams then. No." His mouth pressed into her hair. "They were not dreams." She closed her eyes. She thought of all the nights she had lain awake and called herself a fool for the warmth that would not leave her bones, and she felt the last small, hard thing inside her chest, the brittle thing she had been protecting since the night of the wedding, finally let go. "Kaysen," she said. "Yes. When this is over. When we are home. I want you to come to my window the way you used to." She felt the breath leave him in something that was almost laughter. "I will come every night for the rest of our lives," he said. "I will come to whatever window you sleep behind. I will come if the window is in a tower. I will come if the window is on the moon." She turned in the saddle as much as her belly allowed, and she lifted her face to his, and she kissed him. It was not the kiss of the herb garden. It was not the careful kiss of a king who had to be at council in an hour. It was 4 months of grief, and a winter on the road and a yard full of dead enemies, and it caught and burned in a way that took her breath. The mark beneath her collarbone flared bright, and the answering mark on his chest answered, and for one staggered heartbeat she felt every emotion he was holding at once, the fury and the relief, and the love and the fear, all of it pouring across the bond into her until she had to break the kiss just to breathe. Soon, he said against her mouth. His voice was rough. When you are safe. When the Folkmeres are answered. I will finish what I began on the night of the half moon, and I will not stop until you have no doubt left in you of what you are to me. She nodded. She could not speak. The horse carried them on. Dawn came up gray behind them, and then gold, and then the high spires of Hollowmere rose out of the mist on the southern horizon, and the column slowed. Something was wrong. She felt it before she saw it. The mark beneath her collarbone, which had been quiet against his warmth for hours, began to prickle in a way that had nothing to do with him. Halcaster reined his horse in beside theirs and lifted a hand. The wolves in front of them slowed and milled and stopped. There was smoke over Hollowmere, not the smoke of cook fires, not the smoke of foundries. 3 separate towers of black smoke rose from 3 separate quarters of the city, and the great banner above the main gate was not the dark green wolf of House Frayne. It was a pale silver crest she did not recognize at first. When she did, the breath went out of her. A hooded ram, on a field of white, the crest of House Folkmere. They have taken the city, Kaysen said. His voice was very quiet. The quiet of a man on the edge of becoming something nobody wanted to see. A rider broke from the gate at a flat gallop. He was one of his own. She could see that even from a distance. He came up the road with his horse foaming and his cloak half torn away, and when he reached them, he half fell from the saddle and Halcaster caught him. My king, the rider gasped. He could barely get the words out. It happened in the night. Lord Halvor Volkmere entered the throne hall with 60 men of his own house and 20 of the city guard who he had bought. He has named himself protector of the realm. He has claimed the king has gone mad and cannot rule. He has crowned his daughter. Kaysen's hand on her belly went rigid. There is more. The rider's voice broke. He has taken hostages, 42 of the household servants, the cook, the 2 stable boys, the old woman who used to sit with the Queen Mother before she died. They have been bound in the throne hall with ropes set across the rafters. He has sworn to begin hanging them at the first stroke of noon, all of them, unless you come into the city alone and unarmed and surrender yourself for trial. Mavora, she heard herself say. Mistress Caderin. She was at the apothecary. On the list, the rider said. The first name on the list. She saw behind her eyes the small woman who had taught her to make willow tea, who had put a hand on her cheek the night before she ran and asked her gently whether she was certain she did not want to stay. Caderin Pell, who had asked no further questions. Caderin Pell, who had cleaned her own apothecary the next morning and told the king's riders when they came that she did not know where the girl had gone. She turned in the saddle. Kaysen, you will not enter that city, he said before she could finish. Not while there is breath in my body. They will hang her. I will go. I will not let her hang. They will kill you. That is between me and the gate. No. She gripped the front of his coat in both hands. It is not. It is between you and me and the wolves you have left, and the children inside me who would rather not be raised by Halvor Folkmere. I am not asking you to walk into that city alone. I am telling you we walk in together. Or we lose every person who was kind to me when I had nothing. He looked down at her. For a long moment she thought he would refuse her. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted into something that was almost a smile, although his eyes did not change. My queen, he said, even now. He turned in the saddle and lifted his voice, and the tide of wolves behind them lifted their heads as one. Hollowmere has been taken from us, he called. He did not shout. He did not need to. The Volkmeres sit on a throne that is not theirs. They have placed a noose around the necks of the people who fed us as children. They believe that they have won. He drew the great black sword that hung at his saddle. The wolves around him began, very low, to growl. They are wrong. The growl became a howl. It rose from 100 throats, and then 1,000, until the hills above the city rang with it, and inside Myvora's chest the babes kicked together, hard, as though they had decided to add their voices to it. The army of wolves of Marrowfell broke into a run for the gates of Hollowmere. The outer gate fell faster than anyone had a right to expect. Mavora watched it from the brow of the hill where Kaysen had set her under guard, with two of his largest wolves on either side of her saddle, and Halcaster pacing in tight circles in front of her, like a sentinel who had been ordered to stay behind and did not approve of the order. Below them, the wolves of Marrowfell hit the bronze-bound timbers in a wave. The Volkmeers had thought to barricade the inner gate with iron and oil and hot pitch. They had not thought, perhaps, that the king of the country would arrive in person at the head of his entire pack, every one of them awake and starving for what had been done to him. The gate gave way in the time it took her to count to 100. The smoke over the city thickened. She could feel Kaysen through the bond. Not his thoughts, not yet, but his rage. It rolled over the bond in slow, heavy waves, like swells under a black sea, and her own hands shook with the tail end of it. Twice she had to lift them off the saddle horn and press them flat against her belly to remind her babes that none of this was for them. My lady. Halcaster appeared at her stirrup. His face was streaked with soot. He had come back up the hill at a run. He has taken the second gate. The third will fall within the hour. But the throne hall is sealed and Halvar Volkmere has the hostages bound inside it. Ropes set across the rafters above their heads. He says he will begin hanging them at the first stroke of noon. The bell of the city's high tower rang the 11th hour. She looked up at him. How many? 42. Cateron. At the front of the line, he has placed her closest to the dais. She closed her eyes. She thought of a small woman whose hands had always been faintly stained green from the herbs she ground, who had pretended not to notice when a girl came back to her rooms long after midnight smelling of crushed apple blossoms. Caterin, who had taken her in when she had no name and no home, and had asked nothing of her except that she be kind to the patients. She opened her eyes. Bring me down. My lady, the king said. Halcaster, bring me down. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and helped her from the saddle, and he did not say another word about it. The streets of Hollowmere were a strangeness she did not have time to feel. There were Volkmere banners thrown down in the gutters where wolves had torn them from the windows. There were dead men in the doorways of houses she had once walked past on her way to the river. There was a child crying somewhere behind a shutter, and an old man kneeling in the middle of the bread market with his hands raised in surrender to no one in particular. The smoke stung her eyes. The mark beneath her collarbone burned its way across the city like a thread, and she followed the thread. She found Kaysen at the great inner doors of the throne hall. He was in human form again. The black sword in his hand was wet to the hilt. 6 of his wolves stood with their backs to him, facing outward, snarling at the corridor. He turned at the sound of her step. His eyes widened. No, he said. Yes. Mavora, you are not going in there. She walked up to him and laid her hand flat against the front of his coat, over his heart, where her mark on him answered her. I am going in there, she said. He will use you. He will try. Mavora. Kaysen. She tilted her face up. Listen to me. Halvar Volkmere has 42 people kneeling in your throne hall with ropes around their necks. He has set this trap for you, and he has made it impossible for you to walk into it without being torn in half. So I will walk into it instead. He does not know me. He has never seen my face. He thinks I am a country healer with a swollen belly. He does not know what is in my hands, and he does not know what is in my blood, and he does not know what is in our children. Let him underestimate me. It is the only advantage we have left. He stared down at her. She watched his throat work. If he hurts you, he said, very low, I will eat his heart in front of his daughter. I know. Mavora, I love you. Open the door. He looked at her another long moment. Then he stepped to one side. Halcaster, who had come up behind her without her hearing him, gave her a single short nod, the kind of nod a soldier gives a captain. She set both palms flat against the great doors of the throne hall and pushed. They opened with the slow, heavy sigh of old oak. The hall was as she remembered, and not at all as she remembered. The long banners of House Vrain had been torn down. New banners hung in their place, the silver ram on its field of white, 3 of them tall as a house. The 42 hostages knelt in a line down the center of the hall, their hands bound behind their backs, ropes already looped across the high beams. Catherine was at the front. Her gray hair had come loose from its pins. There was a bruise across her cheek. On the throne, with his daughter at his right hand and a crown that was not his on his head, sat Halvor Volkmir. He was a tall, thin man with the sort of face one forgot easily. His hair had gone white at the temples in a way that suggested the rest of it would follow soon. His daughter Sarah, in a pale wedding gown that looked as though it had been cut down for everyday wear, stood at his shoulder, and her eyes locked onto Maevora's belly with a hatred so direct it was almost a blow. "Father," Sarah said, "the healer." "Indeed." Halvor Volkmir tilted his head. "The famous healer. I had imagined her somewhat taller." "I am unarmed," Maevora said. Her voice was steady. She did not understand how. "I have come to make you an offer." "An offer? You want the king. The king will not come, not while you have a knife at the throats of his servants. So I will give you something better." She set her hand flat over her belly. "Take me. Release them. The maid of the king and the heirs in her womb are worth more to you than 42 cooks." Sarah's lip curled. "Father, kill her now." "Patience, daughter." Halvor Volkmir leaned forward in the throne. He smiled a thin, amused smile. A dead hostage is no hostage at all. A living one, with the proper contents in her belly, is the entire kingdom on a string. He raised his hand. "Cut them down." The Volkmir guards at the back began sullenly to slice the ropes from the hostages' wrists. Catherine turned her face toward Maevora as she rose. Her eyes were full of tears. "Child," she whispered. "Oh, child, no. Go," Maevora said. "Go, mistress." Halvor Volkmir snapped his fingers, and 2 of his guards seized Maevora by the upper arms and walked her up the long aisle toward the dais. She did not resist. The hostages were stumbling out, half disbelieving, herded by guards who had no further use for them. From beyond the doors she heard Kaysen's voice, raised, controlled, ordering Hellcaster to keep the people moving, to keep them safe, to fall back, to hold. She had reached the foot of the dais when the babes inside her woke up. It was not a kick. It was not the pressure of a foot or a hand. It was a great slow turning, both of them at once, and a deep, sweet warmth that began at the base of her spine and rose all the way through her as though someone had lit a lantern inside her. The mark beneath her collarbone went hot. She lifted her hands. Halvor Volkmir saw the gold light a half second before it bloomed. His pale eyes widened. His mouth opened. She had time to see Sarah Volkmir take a step back. She had time to see the captain of the guard reach for the hilt of his sword. She had time to see Kadarin, halfway to the doors, turn her head and stop walking and stare back in stunned wonder. Then the light came. It was not the small contained gold she had used to heal Hellcaster. It was something the babes had been holding for her. Something that had been waiting all winter. Something that knew exactly what kind of room it had been brought into. It poured out of her hands in 2 great ribbons and rose to the high vaults of the throne hall and turned the air honey-colored. The Volkmir guards dropped their swords. They did not choose to. Their hands simply opened. The captain went to one knee and could not seem to understand why. And inside her, low, deep, the bones of her hips began to move. She had been told this was not possible. Wolfkind shifted. Sun-touched did not. She had been raised on that absolute. The warmth in her hands had been a girl's secret. The wolf in Kaysen's blood had been a king's birthright. They had never been the same kind of thing. Tonight, apparently, they were. She fell to her knees on the polished marble. A sound came out of her that she had never made before. The light around her flared brighter. She heard a great shattering crash from the doors, and she knew, somewhere underneath the pain, that Kaysen had come through them. Halvor Volkmir rose from the throne with a long, thin blade in his hand. Its edge was the wrong color. It gleamed pale green in the light, the green of old verdigris, the green of fell smoke distilled. The same poison he had used on his king. He brought the blade down toward the back of her bowed neck. The blade did not land. It stopped a hand's breadth above her neck, and the reason it stopped was that she had caught it. Mavora was not entirely sure how. Her body was in the middle of becoming something it had never been. Bones in her hips and shoulders had begun to slide into new arrangements. Her vision had gone strange. The marble under her knees had begun to crack in a slow rosette of fine lines. But somewhere in the cataclysm of the change, her right arm had risen of its own accord, and her hand, no longer shaped quite like a hand, had closed around the flat of the poisoned sword and held it. The fell smoke on the blade burned where it touched her palm. She felt the green eating at her fingers, and she felt the gold inside her rise up to meet it and refuse it, and she felt her own teeth, which had begun to be too large for her mouth, draw back from a snarl that did not belong to a woman. "No," she said. The voice was not quite hers anymore. There were lower notes in it, and older notes. And Halvor Volkmir, who had spent a lifetime arranging his face, lost control of his face for 1 full second. He pulled at the sword. It did not move. She lifted her head and looked at him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him let go of the hilt and step back. The sword fell. She did not let it. She turned her hand, and the green-edged blade snapped, just below the cross guard, with a clean, dry sound like a bone breaking. The two halves fell to the marble and lay there. Then the change took her. It was nothing like she had been told. She had heard stories of the first shift. She had listened to Mother Druve describe it once over a cup of nettle tea, the long pain, the bewilderment, the way a young wolf will sometimes weep for its own body for a week afterward. What rose in Mavora was not that. It was a great unlocking. It was the feeling of a door she had not known existed swinging wide on a room she had been living next to her whole life, and the room was full of light, and the light had been hers all along. Her bones did not break. They unfolded. Her skin did not split. It was simply that there was suddenly more of her than there had been, and the more was covered in fur, the color of very pale gold, the color of the warmth she had hidden in her hands since she was a child. Her hearing widened. She could hear, separately and at once, every breath in the throne hall. She could hear Kaderin weeping near the door. She could hear the bell of the high tower beginning, somewhere very far away, to ring noon. She could hear her own babes. They were not afraid. Their 2 small heartbeats were drumming against each other inside her in a quick, triumphant rhythm, and the sound of them was the most ordinary and miraculous thing she had ever heard. She stood up on 4 legs. She was not as large as Kaysen. She was perhaps 2/3 his size, lean and long-legged, built more for running than for breaking. But the gold of her fur was its own light. It threw soft, warm color onto the white marble and onto the silver ram banners, and onto the pale, astonished faces of the Volkmir guards who had dropped their swords and were now backing away from her toward the walls. Halvor Volkmir did the only thing he could think to do. He bolted for the side door behind the dais. He did not reach it. A black shape the size of a cart horse came down on him from above. Kaysen had crossed the throne hall in 3 bounds, not on the floor but along the upper rail of the gallery, and he hit Halvor Volkmir between the shoulders with the full weight of his wolf, and the lord of House Volkmir went down under him, and that was the end of the man who had drugged a king. Sarah Volkmir screamed. She had a small knife. Mavora saw her draw it from her sleeve. She saw her start across the dais toward Kaysen's exposed back. The babes inside her made another small turning noise, low and pleased, and the gold light around Maevora's pale fur flared brighter. She crossed the throne hall in 2 strides. She did not kill Sarah. She had thought, in the half-second before she moved, that she might. The fury was there. It had been waiting for 4 months. But when she landed in front of the woman in the cut-down wedding gown, she only set her teeth into the wrist of the hand that held the knife, very precisely, and she took the knife from her, and she let her go. Sarah fell back against the throne with a thin, shrill noise. The knife clattered to the floor. "She is not worth your jaw," Kaysen said inside her head. She turned her great pale head and looked at him. He had the body of the dead lord beneath one paw. His amber eyes burned like banked forges. The sound he had made inside her mind had been low and warm and entirely conversational, and underneath it lay a flavor that was unmistakably his pride. "You can speak in my head," she said. "You can speak in mine." "How?" "The bond," he said. "We have not finished it yet, and we are already further into each other than I have ever been with anyone alive. Maevora." His voice softened in her mind. "You are gold." "Apparently, I am." She felt him laugh. The wolf laugh and the man laugh at once. "Stay," he said. "Just for a moment. Let me look at you." She stayed. The throne hall around them had emptied of fight. The Folkmere guards had been disarmed by Halcaster's wolves, who had come pouring in behind their king and had set their teeth into wrists and ankles and dragged men off into the corners of the hall. Sarah Volkmere was being bound by a gray female wolf who, even shifted, had managed to look disapproving. The hostages were gathered at the far doors, weeping and clinging to one another, and Katerin Pell stood among them with both hands pressed to her mouth, staring across the hall at the great pale gold creature where her servant girl had been. Maevora shifted back. She had not known she could. She had been told the first shift took the better part of a day to come down from. But the gold light gathered itself into her again as easily as it had risen out of her, and in the space between 2 breaths, she was on her bare knees on the cool marble, human-shaped, with her arms wrapped around the curve of her belly, and the babes still drumming their small, steady rhythm against her palms. A black coat fell across her shoulders. Kaysen had shifted too. He knelt behind her and drew the coat around her, and he laid his face into the curve of her shoulder and stayed there for a long moment, simply breathing her in. "Maevora." "They are well," she said. She knew that was the thing he needed to hear first. "Both of them. They are very pleased with themselves." His shoulders shook against hers. She thought for a moment he was weeping again, then she realized he was laughing. "Of course they are," he said. "They are ours." She turned in his arms. She put her hands on either side of his face. He had a smear of someone else's blood across his jaw, and a long, shallow cut over his cheekbone, and his eyes were the brightest thing in the room. "Finish it," she said. He went still. "Maevora, you said when I was safe, when the Volkmeres were answered, both are done. Finish it." "Here? Here. I do not want to walk one more day with this half open between us. Finish it." He understood. He drew her up to her feet. She had to lean on him, and he steadied her without complaint. He took her hand and led her to the foot of the dais, away from the bodies and the bound prisoners, into a small pool of clean light from a high window where the smoke had not reached. He bared his throat to her. "Claim me," he said, "on your terms, the way you should have been allowed to from the beginning." The Alpha King of Marrowfell stood in the broken throne hall of his own kingdom, with a black coat half on and his hair full of plaster dust, and offered the soft underside of his throat to a sun-touched healer who had once gathered moonflowers in his herb garden. She set her mouth to the place where his pulse beat. Her teeth were ordinary teeth again, but the bond did not seem to mind. She bit down, gently, until she tasted the iron warmth of him, and the bond between them, which had been half open since the night of the half-moon, opened the rest of the way at once. It was not pain. It was every door in a long house being thrown wide altogether. She felt him pour into her. Every memory he had of her, from the first night in the herb garden to the morning he had woken with the taste of fell smoke on his tongue. Every fear he had carried alone. Every plan he had made in the small hours of his worst nights about how he would rebuild the world with her in it if he were ever permitted to find her again. She felt the precise weight of his love, which was heavier than she had let herself believe, and gentler. And she felt herself going the other way, into him. She felt him receive the night she had nearly frozen in the snow, the morning in Brindlewatch when she had first heard the babe's heartbeats with a wooden cone pressed to her belly, and had wept for an hour with the wonder of it. The 100 small kindnesses of Mother Druve. The afternoon she had stood in the bakery yard and decided that if her children grew up, never knowing their father, she would teach them to love him anyway. Every dream of him, every ache, every moment of stubborn, undignified, unkillable hope. When she finally lifted her mouth from his throat, both of them were shaking. He took her face in both hands. "My queen," he said. "My king." He pressed his forehead to hers. Around them, the wolves of Marrowfell began, very quietly at first, and then with rising voices, to howl. It was not the howl of a hunt. It was not the howl of a war. It was a deep humming chord of relief, a sound a pack makes when its broken edge has been mended. Maevora heard it through the open doors and through the high windows and from the streets of the city and, somewhere very far away, from the hills above Hollowmere, where wolves who had never set foot in the capital lifted their heads to add their voices. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom of Marrowfell turned itself slowly back upright. Halvor Volkmir was buried in the unmarked plot reserved for traitors, and the lands of his house were divided among the families who had refused his coup. Sarah Volkmir was tried before the High Council on charges of conspiracy, attempted regicide, and the use of forbidden tinctures. She was stripped of her name and her title and sent in a closed wagon to the stone abbey at the eastern edge of the world, where the sisters did not speak and the wind did not stop, and where she would remain until the end of her natural life. The old apothecary mistress Caderin Pell was made the personal physician to the queen, with 3 apprentices of her own choosing, and a salary that scandalized the council into a polite silence. The Volkmere banner was taken down from the walls of Hollowmere. The dark green wolf of House Rain went up in its place. The bells of the cathedral rang for an hour the day the new banner was raised, and the city, which had been holding its breath since the wedding, exhaled at last. The people of Marrowfell took to Maevora in a way she had not expected. She had braced herself for suspicion. A servant girl with a swollen belly, an unknown bloodline, a sun-touched gift the wolf clergy did not entirely know what to do with. Instead, the wolves of the capital wept openly the first time she walked through the lower city on Kaysen's arm. Old women tried to press flowers into her hands. The children of the bread market called her by the small name Yenna, which had somehow followed her home from Brindlewatch, and which she did not have the heart to correct. The bond on her throat, the silver pale scar that had bloomed where her teeth had marked Kaysen and his had marked her, was not hidden. She wore it open to the air. The wolves could feel the truth of it on her, and they did not need anyone to explain it. On a warm, bright evening at the end of summer, in a room high above the city where the windows had been left open to catch the last of the day, Maevora gave birth to 2 children. The first was a boy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's hands, and when the midwife laid him on Maevora's chest, he opened his eyes and looked at her with the quiet, considering expression of a child who had already met her. The second was a girl. She had pale gold fuzz on the top of her head and amber eyes that were already, somehow, bright. And when the midwife laid her beside her brother, she turned her small face toward him and made a soft, contented noise that was not quite a human noise, and not quite anything else. Kaysen sat on the edge of the bed with both children in the great bowl of his arms and looked down at them as though he had been handed the entire world to hold. Mevora. I know. Mevora, they are? I know. He could not finish the sentence. He sat there with his face wet and his children sleeping against his chest, and after a while she reached up and pressed her palm against the bond on his throat, and he closed his hand over hers and held it there. Thank you, he said, for coming back, for walking into that hall, for loving me even when you should not have. Thank you, Mavera. She lifted her chin. He bent down. She kissed him very softly, with their children warm between them, and the late summer light coming through the open window onto all four of them at once. Always, she said. Always, he agreed. Outside, the wolves of Hollowmere lifted their voices into the gathering dusk, and the long howl that rose over the city that evening was passed from pack to pack, north and south and east and west, until it reached the smallest village on the smallest road in Marrowfell, where an old herb woman stood in her doorway with her face turned to the sky, and listened to the news that the bond between the king and his true queen was, at last, complete. In the great record of the kingdom that was kept in the cathedral library, a new page was added that year. It told the story of a girl who had gathered moonflowers in a king's herb garden, of a king who had been silenced for 1 hour and had spent every hour after looking for her, and of a bond that fell smoke and silver rams and 42 ropes on a wall had not been able to break. They had found their way back to each other against everything. They never let each other go again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.